There was a time when these shores weren't just a destination, they were a state of mind, a place where a whole generation of seekers came to escape the world only to end up creating a new one. This was Goa, a hippie utopia. So, what happened to that dream? And what's left of that paradise once it was lost? For the better part of 2 decades, this small state on India's west coast was the last stop on a global pilgrimage, the very heart of a counterculture that chose freedom over fortune. From spiritual awakenings on Anjuna beach to the legendary full moon parties that gave birth to a whole new genre of music. This is the story of the Goan hippie sanctuary. We'll explore the music, the markets, and the cultural shifts that eventually brought the dream to an end. This is the rise and fall of paradise. To get why Goa became a utopia, you first have to understand the world the hippies were so desperate to escape. The 1960s in the West were a pressure cooker of social upheaval. Young people were fed up with the rampant materialism of their parents' generation, the stiff social rules, and the constant shadow of the Vietnam War. A counterculture exploded, one that threw out the rule book and went searching for a different way to live. Their Bible was Kerouac, their soundtrack was psychedelic rock, and their map pointed east. This led to the creation of the Hippie Trail, a sprawling, informal route that snaked its way from Europe through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and into India and Nepal. It was a modern-day pilgrimage for anyone chasing spiritual fulfillment and a little adventure. For many of these travelers, the trail didn't stop in the mountains. It ended on the sun-soaked beaches of Goa. So why Goa? What made this one spot the promised land? Part of it is in its one-of-a-kind history. For over 450 years, Goa was a Portuguese colony and only became part of India in 1961. This left it with a unique cultural mix and a famously relaxed attitude known locally as Susegad. When the first hippies washed up on its shores, they didn't find a tourist trap. They found quiet fishing villages, untouched beaches, and locals who were surprisingly tolerant and welcoming. It was a blank canvas, the perfect place to build a new world from the ground up. The 1970s were the golden age of hippie Goa. This wasn't a 2-week vacation, it was a way of life. Tiny coastal villages like Anjuna, Vagator, and Kolva became the centers of this new, unconventional society. Life was simple, cheap, and communal. Hippies would rent rooms from local families for next to nothing or just build their own temporary shacks right on the beach. Resources were shared, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the sun and the tides. A fascinating social dynamic took hold. Unlike the colonizers of the past, the hippies came, as one writer noted, to be colonized rather than to colonize. They tried to integrate, picking up local customs and in turn bringing a new kind of informal economy to these once isolated areas. This society had no real leaders, but it had its anchors, figures like Eight Finger Eddie, an American traveler who became one of Goa's first long-term settlers, helped shape the community, running soup kitchens and guiding newcomers through this strange and wonderful new world. Days were spent in a kind of blissful haze, swimming, practicing yoga, debating philosophy, and exploring consciousness, often with a little help from psychedelic substances, which were widely seen as tools for spiritual insight. It was a genuine quest for inner peace, a way to shed the anxieties of the West. They had found their paradise, a place where the old rules didn't apply, and for a little while it really seemed like it could last forever. Every utopia needs a soundtrack, and the one born in Goa was nothing short of revolutionary. In the early days, the music was what you'd expect: acoustic guitars around a campfire playing psychedelic rock from back home. But as the 70s rolled into the 80s, something new and electric started to bubble up. Travelers brought tapes of electronic music from Europe, and DJs began to experiment. They blended industrial synth sounds with the psychedelic vibes and spiritual themes that defined the Goa experience. Out of this sonic melting pot, Goa Trance was born. But it was more than just music, it was a ritual. Legendary all-night full moon parties became the movement's sacred ceremonies. Held at iconic open-air spots like Shiva Valley and Hilltop, these gatherings were ecstatic, hypnotic celebrations of life, dance, and togetherness. Pioneers like Goa Gill, an American who became a sadhu and DJ, preached the idea that dance was a form of active meditation. The goal wasn't just to party, it was to hit a collective state of trance, to connect with the music, the environment, and each other on a much deeper level. The fast rolling bass lines and spiraling layered melodies were engineered to take the dancer on a journey. This unique sound, born on the sands of Anjuna, would eventually conquer the globe as psytrance, a permanent musical legacy of this brief, shining moment. If the parties were Goa's soul, then the Anjuna flea market was its beating heart. It all started in the early 1970s as a simple way for hippies to sell or trade their stuff to fund their stay. But it quickly grew into a vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful cultural institution. Every Wednesday, the fields near Anjuna beach would transform into this sprawling bazaar. It was a kaleidoscope of commerce and culture where you could find anything from handmade jewelry and bohemian fashion to Tibetan artifacts and old paperbacks. It became a meeting point for Western hippies, local Goan artisans, and craftspeople from all over India. But the market was more than just a place to shop, it was the community's living room. It was where people met up, shared news, and just hung out. The air was thick with the smell of spices and incense and filled with the sounds of haggling, laughter, and live music. The market perfectly captured the self-sufficient creative spirit of the whole movement, creating an economic ecosystem that supported travelers and locals alike, a spirit that, in some ways, you can still feel there today. But here's the thing about utopias, they're rarely built to last. By the late 1980s, the Goan dream was starting to unravel. The very things that made it a paradise, its freedom, its beauty, its secrecy, were the same things that made it a target. The word was out and Goa was no longer a secret. Mainstream tourism started arriving, not in a trickle but in waves. Package tourists began to replace the pilgrims. The quiet fishing villages saw the first hotels and resorts break ground. This rush of commercialization brought money, sure, but it also triggered a massive culture clash. The casual nudity on the beaches, the open drug use, and the fierce independence of the hippie scene didn't exactly mesh with the new, more conservative tourists or with the Indian authorities. The once laissez-faire Goan government started to crack down. Parties were regulated and visas became much harder to get. At the same time, the darker side of the drug culture began to show. The communal spiritual use of psychedelics started giving way to harder, more addictive substances and all the problems that came with them. The innocent freedom that had defined the golden age started to feel jaded and commercialized. Paradise was slowly being sold off piece by piece to the highest bidder. Visiting Goa today can feel like walking through the ghost of a beautiful dream. The hippie culture that once defined the place is now just a faint echo, a small subculture in a place it once dominated. The beaches of Anjuna and Vagator are now lined with commercial shacks and luxury resorts. The Goan authorities have made no secret of the fact that they prefer moneyed visitors to the long-staying, free-spirited backpackers of the past. And yet, you can't deny the legacy. The Anjuna flea market still happens every Wednesday, though it's now a major tourist attraction, its original bohemian spirit diluted with a heavy dose of commercial savvy, and the music scene born here, it exploded into a global industry. Huge electronic music festivals like Sunburn, which started in Goa in 2007, attract hundreds of thousands of fans. It's a world away from the intimate beach parties of the 70s, but it's a direct descendant all the same. Venues like Hilltop still host psytrance parties paying homage to the genre's roots. But this legacy has come at a cost. Over-tourism is putting a massive strain on Goa's infrastructure and environment. The commercialization of local culture has, in many ways, watered down its authenticity, tailoring it for tourist consumption rather than preserving tradition. The very idea of susegad, that relaxed Goan way of life, is under threat from frantic development and the pace of modern tourism. The story of Goa is a complicated one and its legacy is still up for debate. What do you think? Is the free-spirited soul of the original hippie utopia still alive in Goa, or is it gone for good? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this trip back in time, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about the movements that changed our world. The rise and fall of Goa's hippie Utopia is about more than just parties on a beach. It's a story about the universal search for paradise and the messy complications that come when you actually find it. The hippies came to Goa looking for an escape from the material world, but in the end, the material world found them anyway. They turned a sleepy corner of India into a global icon, leaving a permanent mark on its culture, its music, and its economy. But in doing so, they also accidentally planted the seeds of its commercialization. The story of Goa is a timeless, bittersweet reminder that maybe the dream of a perfect, untouched utopia is just that, a dream. And that paradise isn't a place you find on a map, but something you have to build, protect, and ultimately something you can lose.